Sylvester Stallone pulls up alone to a crumbling building on the edge of the city. No cameras, no spotlight, just him, and a promise he made long ago. He steps inside a forgotten veteran's home where the walls are cracked, the air smells like rust and old memories, and the men inside have been abandoned by the same country they once fought for. He came for a visit, but what he finds leaves everyone speechless, including him. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at 6 p.m., we've got another one that just might change how you see the world. He wasn't supposed to be there, not on a cold Tuesday afternoon, not wearing that same leather jacket from the 80s, and certainly not without cameras or press. But he stood there, taller than anyone remembered, older than anyone expected, and heavier with something behind the eyes, something unspoken. The wind carried with it the smell of rust and bleach, a hint of something burnt, and the silence that only forgotten places know how to keep. The small wooden sign hanging above the rusted gate read, "St. Bridget's Veterans Care Facility," but that was generous. Facility was a word people used to avoid saying dumping ground. Sylvester Stallone stepped through the gate alone. No entourage, no press, no sunglasses. The only person who noticed him at first was Ellie, a 28-year-old nurse with dark circles under her eyes and a clipboard glued to her hip. She paused mid-stride, blinking in disbelief as the man who played Legends walked past her like he was looking for a memory or a ghost. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the weight of unspoken trauma and too many pills. The hallways echoed, not with sound, but with years, and that's when he saw them. Old men sitting in broken wheelchairs, some watching a television that hadn't worked in weeks, others talking to walls or staring into the abyss between then and now. One man, tall, skeletal, saluted a broken mirror, another folded napkins as if they were flags, and then one voice, gravelly and sharp, cut through the quiet. "Well, I'll be damned. That Rambo." It was Sergeant Mike Rowan, 78 years old, Purple Heart, Silver Star, and no visitors in 13 years. Stallone turned his head. "No, just a guy who used to pretend to be brave." Mike let out a dry chuckle. "Well, you fooled us all. Sit down." So he did. He didn't ask permission. He didn't make a speech. He just sat on the floor, back against the peeling paint beside a man whose bones stuck through his skin, and said, "I heard about this place, and it pissed me off." Ellie, watching from a distance, almost dropped her clipboard. She'd seen celebrities make promises, seen them pose, nod, vanish. But this was different. "They send you here to disappear," Mike said, bitterness sharpening his word. Stallone nodded. "But I don't forget ghosts. I see them every time I close my eyes." But he hadn't come just to talk. He had come because something had snapped. A letter, handwritten by a veteran named Kenny, had landed in his hands weeks ago. It wasn't sent to him. It was meant for God. Kenny had tried to kill himself with aspirin and Jack Daniels. He'd failed. But the letter had survived. Therefore, Stallone found himself here, among the forgotten, walking through rooms that smelled like dying, and shaking hands with men who used to carry flags now folded at their bedsides. He stayed for hours. He listened to war stories that had never been told. He read letters never mailed. He saw the medals pinned to shirts that no longer fit, and he heard something no politician ever heard. "I wish I hadn't made it back." Those words stuck to his ribs like When evening came, Ellie approached him. "Most people don't last 20 minutes. Why are you still here?" He looked at her, eyes unreadable, because no one else is. And then he asked for a tour of the broken water system, of the empty kitchen, of the mold crawling up the dorm walls. She showed him the storage closet that used to be the therapy room, the gym that was just a rubber mat, and a torn jump rope. The mental health wing that was a hallway with one locked door. Then she showed him Kenny. Kenny didn't talk. He stared at a wall, whispering to people who weren't there. His hands trembled. His boots were polished. "I brought his letter," Stallone said. "The one he wrote." Ellie's mouth parted. "How did you—" But he didn't answer. He just stepped into Kenny's room, crouched beside him, and placed the folded paper on the floor. Kenny's lips stopped moving. His eyes drifted down. A long silence. Then, with a voice full of dust and rain, Kenny said, "I didn't think anyone would read it." Stallone nodded. "I did." That night Stallone didn't go home. He slept in a metal chair beside Mike Rowan, arms crossed, staring at the ceiling tiles as if trying to count every crack. In the morning he made a phone call, one to a contractor he trusted, another to a lawyer, a third to someone in the Department of Veterans Affairs who owed him a favor. But word got out. Therefore, the press showed up, uninvited, hungry for a headline. Stallone visits veterans. Rambo returns. Hollywood hero turns real-life savior. He didn't speak to them, not one word. Instead, he looked at Kenny, who was now sitting upright, and whispered, "You okay with cameras?" Kenny smiled, only if they're not fake. Then Stallone stepped out onto the cracked concrete porch where 3 reporters waited. "No questions," he said, "just one thing." He looked into the lens of the camera like he was looking. "These men are not broken. They were abandoned, and I don't abandon people." And just like that, he turned his back to the cameras, but that wasn't the end. Later that day, someone tried to buy the property. A private company promised to turn it into luxury retirement housing. Therefore, Stallone made another phone call, and another, and another. Until one day, without warning, a black SUV pulled up in front of St. Bridget's. A man in a suit stepped out. His name was Wallace, Secretary of Veteran Affairs. He offered a handshake. Stallone didn't take it. "I'm not here for photo ops," Stallone said. Wallace smiled. "Neither am I." Behind him, a van rolled in. Inside, new beds, new supplies, paint, food, a start. That night, Stallone walked through the hallway again. This time, the TV worked. Someone was laughing. The smell of rust was fading under fresh coats of white paint. Ellie found him staring at the American flag above the door. "It's been there forever," she said. "Faded, torn, but we never took it down." Stallone looked at it for a long time. "You shouldn't." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a second flag, folded crisp, brand new. "For the day they remember this place again," he said. "Not because I was here, but because they were." She took it, eyes wet. Outside, the night grew quiet. Inside, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning. But something was still coming. Something no one expected. Because in the shadows of that forgotten facility, not every visitor came with good intentions, and not every secret had been buried. The walls looked brighter, not because they'd been fully painted, but because something had changed in the air. The kind of change you can't photograph. You feel it in the way someone sits up straighter, or how silence doesn't sting as much anymore. For the first time in years, Mike Rowan asked for a second cup of coffee. Ellie laughed when he flirted with her. Kenny, still shaking, still haunted, was walking to the window every morning, looking at the sky like he was waiting for it to speak back. And Stallone? He kept coming back every morning. He'd drive himself in an old black pickup, park by the crooked mailbox, and walk through the gate like he belonged there. No press, no fanfare, just a man who had seen too much pretending he hadn't. One morning, Mike sat beside him on the back porch, the only place in the facility where the light felt honest. "You ever see war, Sly?" Stallone stared at the sky. "I acted like I did." Mike nodded slowly. "Sometimes pretending is worse." They sat in silence for a while. Then Stallone spoke. I remember coming home from my first big movie. The airport was packed, flashbulbs, reporters. They called me a hero. He paused. But none of them were there when my brother died in Nam. Mike turned to him. Your brother? Stallone nodded once. Name was Frank too, like the singer. He enlisted. I stayed home. He came back in a box. They folded a flag and told my mother he died brave. Mike didn't say a word, didn't need to. Stallone exhaled through his nose. That's when I stopped playing characters. I started hiding behind them. Ellie watched from inside. She could feel the weight of that conversation like smoke through glass. She had started documenting everything in a leather-bound journal, not for the media, for the men. A few days later, Stallone gathered the veterans in the common room. Ellie stood beside him, holding a clipboard filled with proposals and plans. They were going to renovate, starting small. New beds, better plumbing, better lighting. Most nodded, some clapped. But then Kenny stood. No. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Kenny's voice was soft, but it cut clean. Fixing the walls doesn't fix what's... Stallone turned to him, expression unreadable. Then what does? Kenny walked forward. His hands trembled, but his eyes... He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased. A group of young soldiers smiling in a field of mud and fire. Kenny pointed to one of the men. That's me, that's Mike, that's Charlie, and that... He paused. That's Wallace. Gasps. Stallone stepped forward. Wallace? As in... Yes, Kenny interrupted. Your government liaison, Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Before he was a politician, he was one of us. Mike stood slowly. That bastard told us we were expendable. Ellie blinked. What do you mean? Kenny's voice shook now. He ordered us into a suicide mission. 16 went out. 4 came back. And he? Stallone asked. He flew out 2 hours before the ambush. Said it was intel. I call it cowardice. But no one believed them. Over the years, every complaint had been buried. The photos went missing. The letters vanished. Wallace climbed the political ladder, spotless. Therefore, Stallone made a decision. He invited Wallace back, under the pretense of progress updates. When Wallace arrived 2 days later, dressed in the same polished suit, the tension in the room was enough to crack drywall. Kenny stood beside Mike, fists clenched. Stallone greeted Wallace with a handshake this time. But there was something else in his eyes. This, Stallone's hand, isn't just about paint. This is about... Wallace smirked. I've done everything in my power. No, Stallone did. You did everything in your interest. He pulled out the photo Kenny had given him. You remember this? He asked, holding it to Wallace's face. Wallace froze, just for a second, just enough. Then he chuckled. Old war stories. People misremember things when they've been hurt. Mike stepped forward. We didn't misremember the screaming, Wallace. The room crackled with something raw, but instead of breaking into chaos, something else happened. Wallace turned to Stallone and whispered, Let's talk outside. They stepped onto the porch. You don't know what you're playing with, Wallace. I'm not playing, Stallone replied. I'm building a war memorial with your name etched on both sides. You want to bury me? Stallone didn't flinch. No. I want you to face them. Wallace laughed and walked off. But not before Stallone slipped a recorder back into his pocket. Therefore, the next morning, Stallone played the recording on the common room speakers. In it, Wallace admitted to protecting himself at the cost of others. Admitted he'd never really believed in the cause, but found it politically useful. The veterans listened in silence. Then applause. But not for the tape, for Kenny, for speaking, for surviving. Later that day, Kenny walked outside, sat beside Stallone, and said, I thought justice was something you stopped believing in. Stallone smiled. Sometimes you have to punch it into existence. Ellie walked up with news. We got a grant, she said. A big one. Anonymous donor said they watched the live stream of your speech. Stallone grinned. "Anonymous, huh?" She nodded. "Says here the donor's initials are FB." He laughed. Frank would have liked that. That night the facility held a bonfire. Mike played a harmonica. Ellie read a poem. Kenny smiled, genuinely, for the first time anyone could remember. And Stallone? He stood back, hands in his pockets, watching. Not as a hero, not as a star. Just as a man trying to balance the scales. But as the fire crackled, a shadow watched from the trees. Someone had followed Wallace, someone with a grudge, and tomorrow, someone would not make it out alive. The rain came fast that morning, not the kind that drizzles, but the kind that slaps windows, floods sidewalks, and drowns silence. Thunder rolled across the sky like artillery. It was fitting. The kind of weather that knew war had returned to the minds of those who lived through it. Inside the facility, lights flickered. Power had gone out twice already. Ellie lit candles and passed out blankets. Mike sat near the door like a soldier on watch. Kenny hadn't spoken since the bonfire. And Stallone? He was pacing. Not because of the rain. Because of the letter that arrived that morning. No return address, no name. Just a single typed sentence. "Your brother didn't die in combat. He was left behind." He read it once. Then again. And again. Frank, his younger brother. The one he never talked about to the press. The one whose funeral had gutted their mother. The one he had carried in his guilt for 5 decades. He clutched the page, jaw tight, heart echoing the thunder outside. But before he could share the letter, the facility went dark. Completely. The generator didn't kick in. The emergency lights stayed dead. Kenny screamed first. "They're coming back." It was instinct, memory, terror. Mike stood up fast, grabbed the flashlight taped under his chair, and shouted, "Everyone stay down! Stallone with me!" The hallway turned to chaos. Footsteps echoed outside. Not one, not two, 3, then silence. Then a shot. Glass shattered near the front. Ellie ducked behind the reception desk, her hands shaking as she dialed for help, but the line was dead. Inside the chaos, Stallone moved like instinct. No actor now, just muscle memory. He pushed Kenny into the supply closet and locked it. "I need you to stay alive," he whispered. Then he turned. Mike was already in the hallway, holding a broom like a rifle. That's when the door burst open. 2 men in black, masks. One held a weapon. The other held a phone. "Mr. Stallone," one of them said, voice calm, "you've made powerful enemies." Stallone didn't answer. The man raised the gun. Therefore, Stallone raised his hands and slowly took out his wallet. He flipped it open. Inside, a photo of Frank, in uniform, smiling, alive. "Before you do this," Stallone said, voice low, "ask your boss why my brother never came home." The masked man hesitated. Stallone stepped forward. "He was your age. Brave, loyal, left to die." Mike took the moment, slammed the broom against the wall, triggering the fire alarm. Sirens blared, smoke filled the hallway, not real smoke, just dust from the broken alarm panel, enough to confuse, enough to give Stallone time. He tackled the gunman, hard. Years of age in his back, but rage in his fists. The other attacker ran. Ellie hit the panic switch behind the reception desk. Finally, lights flickered on. Power returned. The 2 attackers vanished into the storm, but not before dropping something. A phone, locked. But there was one message still on screen. "Confirm target neutralized. Evidence next." Stallone stood there, bruised, blood trickling from his temple. "Target," he whispered. "That's what I am now." But something didn't sit right. He turned to Mike. "You said Wallace ordered that ambush in '72. Did Frank ever serve under him?" Mike blinked. I think so." Stallone's stomach dropped. He stormed into his truck and pulled a file from the glove box. Frank's service records. Half redacted. Ellie followed him outside, rain soaking her scrubs. "You okay?" she asked. He shook his head. "I need the truth, now." Therefore, they drove together to an old bar 3 towns over, the Iron Flag, where veterans drank in silence and memories hung heavier than smoke. Inside sat an old man with burns on half his face. His name was Cooper. He had served with Frank. When Stallone showed him the photo, Cooper's eyes flooded. "He didn't die in the jungle," Cooper said. "He died in a cage. 3 weeks after we pulled out, they left him. We begged Wallace for extraction. He said it wasn't a strategic priority." Stallone's fists clenched. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did," Cooper whispered, "but Wallace got promoted, and I got threatened." He handed Stallone a cassette tape. "One of our guys recorded everything. It's not much, but it's enough." That night, back at the facility, Stallone played the tape on an old stereo. The voices were static-filled, but clear enough. "Wallace, we can't go back for one man. We'll say he was KIA. Another voice. "Sir, it's Stallone. He's alive." Wallace, "He was never supposed to come in the first place. Let it go." Silence. Then a gunshot. The tape ended. The room was still. Kenny wept quietly. Mike saluted no one in particular. Ellie reached for Stallone's hand. And Stallone? He didn't move. Just stared at the wall like it was the past. But there was something else on the phone the attackers dropped. Ellie had charged it. And now inside the encrypted folder was a photo, a recent one, of Frank. Older. Thinner. Alive in a cell. Timestamp 5 months ago. Cambodia. Therefore everything shattered. Frank hadn't died. He had been alive this whole time, kept somewhere, forgotten, betrayed. The narrative of Stallone's life, his grief, his films, his legend, was built on a lie. Ellie gasped. "This changes everything." Stallone whispered, "He's alive." And then the door slammed open. Wallace stood there, no mask, no words, just a face full of fear and fury. "You went too far," he said. Stallone stood. "No," he replied, "I haven't even started." The rain had stopped, but the storm wasn't over. Stallone stood face to face with Wallace in the same hallway where Kenny once whispered to ghosts and Mike once saluted silence. But this time, there was no silence, only truths. "You let him rot," Stallone said void. Wallace didn't blink. "He was a liability." Stallone took a step forward. "He was my brother." Ellie stood behind Stallone, clutching the photo. "We have proof, the recording, the timestamp, the encrypted files. You're finished." Wallace chuckled. "Proof means nothing when the people who hear it have already chosen not to care." "Then we'll make them care," Stallone growled. "One veteran, one story, one truth at a time. But even truth comes with a price." That night, Stallone released the tape online, shared it with every journalist, every veteran group, every contact he had built over a lifetime. He didn't hide, didn't filter. He included the photo, the voice recordings, the documents, and a final message. "If my brother is alive, I'm coming for him, and if he's not, someone answers for it." The video went viral in 6 hours. By morning, Search Free Frank was trending worldwide. The White House issued a statement. The Secretary of Defense opened an investigation. And Wallace vanished. Therefore, Stallone prepared. He sold his ranch. He canceled all future appearances. And with help from former veterans, men and women who believed him, he planned something no one expected. Ellie tried to stop him. "You're not 30 anymore." He smiled. "Then I better move fast." Kenny stood beside him, eyes clearer now than they'd ever been. "You're not going alone." Neither did Mike or Cooper. Within 2 weeks, they were on a plane to Southeast Asia. Stallone, 3 vets, and a local guide named Min, whose father was once saved by an American soldier. That soldier's name, coincidentally, had been Frank Stallone. They landed in Phnom Penh, followed leads, paid informants. waited in jungle towns, and slept in hammocks that creaked with memory. But time wasn't kind. Frank had been moved. Again. The last lead came from a boy, maybe 10, who handed Min a drawing of a man behind bars with one eye closed and a scar across his jaw. "That's him," Stallone said, trembling. Therefore, they moved. 2 days through jungle, crossed an unmarked checkpoint, camped near a river that smelled like old wounds. Then, in the dim orange light of dawn, they found it, an old prison, overgrown with vines and guarded by men who looked more lost than dangerous. Stallone waited until nightfall, and then they breached the gate. No guns, just blades, silence, strategy. Inside the far cell block, beneath a broken corrugated roof, they found a man chained to the wall. Gaunt, gray-haired, eyes sunken, he turned slowly, and Stallone froze. Because despite everything, he recognized him. "Frank!" The man blinked, whispered, "Sly." They didn't cry, they just stared at each other, brothers unbroken by time, war, or abandonment. Then they embraced. No music, no speeches, just the sound of metal unclicking and breath returning. They carried him out on their shoulders. Frank didn't speak for hours. When he finally did, he said one thing: "I thought nobody remembered me." And Stallone replied, "I never forgot ghosts, just like Mike. Just like Kenny, just like all of them." Back in the U.S., the country erupted. News channels couldn't look away. Veterans marched. Wallace was found hiding in a private estate in D.C. and arrested on charges of war crimes, obstruction, and conspiracy. The old facility, St. Bridget's, was renamed the Frank Stallone Home for American Veterans. And Stallone? He didn't give speeches. He just walked the halls every morning, shaking hands, remembering names. Kenny started leading therapy groups. Mike taught chess. Ellie published her book, The Ones Who Stayed. And Frank? He planted a flag in the... didn't speak much. But every morning at sunrise, he'd salute that flag, not out of duty. One day, a young man walked in with a camera crew, asking Stallone for an interview. He declined. But he said one thing: "You want a quote?" The reporter nodded. Stallone pointed to the courtyard where the flag flew, battered by wind. "Go film that, that's..." And then he walked inside, the man who once pretended to be brave. Now, the man who reminded the world what real courage looked like. He wasn't supposed to be there, not on a cold Tuesday morning, not holding his brother's hand, not watching veterans smile again, but he was. And sometimes, ghosts come back not to haunt you, but to thank you for not forgetting. Hey, thanks for sticking around and watching this story. You didn't have to, but you did, and maybe that says something about you. You see, life isn't about the roles we play or the battles we fight on screen. It's about the people we fight for, the ones nobody talks about anymore, the forgotten, the left behind, the ones who gave everything and got nothing in return. So if this story meant something to you, tell someone, share it. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice to rebuild. We don't leave our own behind. Thank you.